Alright guys, so Amazon Prime just put out a new Sherlock Holmes series. I watched it, I feel like talking about it, and considering you clicked on the video, you feel like watching me talk about it. So let's get into it. So this show is essentially a spiritual successor to those Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies, the one starring Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, although it is obviously not starring Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. I should also clarify that this is not in the same canon as those movies, so this is not a young Robert Downey Jr. or anything like that. However, Guy Ritchie is heavily involved in the series. He's not a showrunner, but he was a producer on it, I believe, and he did direct the first two episodes. So this is trying to sort of recapture the magic of those movies. And I would say that it is largely successful. I don't think it's quite as good as those movies, although to be fair, I have huge nostalgia for them. I absolutely adored those movies as a child. And this, it scratches the itch, I will say. It is like, yeah, I felt nice and comfortable and cozy watching this. I was like, I still want the third movie with Robert Downey Jr., but I will certainly take this show. So the basic setup of this show is that Sherlock Holmes is 19 years old. He is not a detective yet. As far as I can tell, after having seen the show, it's not like he has some aspiration, to be a detective or anything. But he is very intelligent. He's a rich kid that's like all out getting into trouble and whatnot. And so, like right off the bat, you can kind of you can see the Sherlock Holmes in him at the very least the Robert Downey Jr. iteration of Sherlock Holmes. And due to events that I guess I won't spoil, he ends up at Oxford, the university, and there ends up being a crime at Oxford that he unwittingly ends up implicated in, and so he must solve the mystery lest he get blamed for it. And I think that, for the most part, this show really works. We have an actor called Hero Fiennes Tiffin playing Sherlock. Apparently, he's Ray Fiennes' nephew, and I think he's really great in the role. Obviously, Robert Downey Jr. is a very tough act to follow. And I will also just say this, like, yes, this is a spiritual successor to that, but like I mentioned before, it's not connected to it, so I don't think you should necessarily have Robert Downey Jr. in your mind as you're watching this. He does a good job. He does his own, there are certainly some similarities, and I could see Ray or Hero growing into more of what Robert Downey Jr. ends up being. But as his own iteration of a young Sherlock Holmes, I think he does a great job with it. Opposite him is Donal Finn. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Not playing Watson, but actually playing James Moriarty, which, if you know anything about Sherlock, you know that it's very interesting that James Moriarty is his friend and companion and like sidekick in the show and not Watson. So, no spoilers. Interesting. It's interesting. I'll just say that. And these two and their dynamics are what are supposed to carry the show, similarly to Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. And I think it really works for the most part. It has sort of that witty back and forth humor that the Guy Ritchie's movies had, and that's very good. A lot of the other supporting cast also have fun back and forths with Sherlock and with each other. And that element of the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies are absolutely present here, and they work super well. Like, they don't feel like cheap knockoffs. I really like these characters. I really like these actors. I laughed a lot at their interactions with one another. And I think that, at the end of the day, that is the most important part, I would argue, of those Sherlock Holmes movies and carrying that feel over. As far as the production value of the show, it's actually quite high. You can tell that they built a lot of physical sets. It's a period piece, so that's obviously going to be pretty expensive. And yeah, Amazon clearly sunk a lot of money into it, and for the most part, you can really tell. There are a couple instances where, like, I don't know, there'll be like an explosion or something, and it's very obvious that like the ash or like ash particles that are done in like After Effects or whatever, and they're just kind of like standing in front of a green screen going like, ah, there's an explosion, but it doesn't feel like the people in the show are actually reacting to it. Anyways, there are few notable moments like that, but I feel like they're especially notable because they stand out when the rest of the show looks as good as it does. I will say the original Guy Ritchie movies had a lot of creative action sequences and like fight scenes. I do think that this show kind of falls short on that. Like, I remember as a kid thinking that Robert Downey Jr. doing the whole thing where he's like, I'm going to predict everything that my opponent is going to do, and as I punch the guy in the stomach, I'm gonna name which organ I'm injuring or whatever. Like, the show doesn't really have anything quite as creative as that. I remember in the original Sherlock Holmes movie there's like a scene where he's like fighting a massive guy with a hammer, and a lot of it's just creative, notable stuff. The action in the show isn't quite as memorable as that. A lot of it is just very standard, like shootout or just kind of scraps, but not as creatively choreographed, I would say. I should also notice that this is also, again, a young Sherlock Holmes. So he throughout the series, he's not a detective. He hasn't like formulated all of that yet. So all that stuff very well could come in later seasons. So we'll see where the show goes from here. As far as the mystery is concerned, I would say that it was pretty interesting at the start. It kind of got less interesting as it went along. And I would also think, I think it's also a pacing issue because there are certainly twists and turns that got me back interested in the mystery, but it would also just like the show. I also just like slugged at certain points where like the plot wasn't progressing. They were all just kind of like waiting around, and it felt like the mystery wasn't progressing like it would in like a Knives Out or a Sherlock Holmes movie where you have to do it all in 2 hours. I do think that stretching out a Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie into a full season of television, it was harder for these writers to keep me engaged in the mystery throughout all of those 8 episodes. So the mystery by the end of it all was a little bit lackluster. It was really more so about like the emotional stakes with the characters, which I guess is more important. But I don't know. I think they could have done a better job with the unfurling process of the mystery. But yeah, I mean, if you didn't know anything about like the origin story of Sherlock Holmes, which personally, there was a lot of stuff that I wasn't all that aware of. Some of the stuff I think is a repeat of the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes show. But a lot of stuff in the show was like, oh, I don't know if they're making this up. I don't know if this was in the original books, but this is interesting to know about Sherlock Holmes. So yeah, this show explores a lot of Sherlock Holmes' backstory from when he was a kid. So even younger Sherlock Holmes. So yeah, I mean, look, is this show like the most amazing thing in the world? I would say no. I think there is certainly room for improvement if they end up greenlighting more seasons of this, which I think it was #1 on Prime Video, so I think it's probably going to do well. I think they can improve. I think they can maybe try to get to the heights of those Sherlock Holmes movies that Guy Ritchie made. But as a first season, as someone who's wanted Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies, who wants that itch scratched, this certainly does that. This is a satisfying watch. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. Just go into it with a little bit lower expectations. But have you seen it? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.